So, one of the questions that really kind of got me into perception science in the first place, something I pondered ever since I was a little boy, really, which is that so there's about a little over 100 people in this class. So let's say you're all watching this, and there's 100 different sets of eyes gazing upon this scene right here. That's my little backyard. Do we all see the same thing? So almost all of you will probably call that a tree. But is it the same shade of green to you as it is to me? How different is what you see from what I see? And it turns out that there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of chop that question up. The most straightforward one, which is actually what I happen to study in my own lab, is attention. So in this scene right here, we can each focus on two very different parts of it. Alright, so I used to mow lawns for a living when I was young. And so when I look at this scene, I notice that there's some sweet, sweet lines right there. I mean, man, someone knows how to drive a mower right, you know what I'm saying? If you weren't all that interested in landscaping, maybe you didn't notice that part of the scene. And honestly, those lines aren't super straight. I've always been really bad at mowing. That's why I don't do it anymore. But you never mind about that. I gotta keep trying. So we can each focus on two different parts. And we can each have two different vantage points. So right here, you're all looking at the camera. So I'm forcing you to have the same one. But you can see the tree from over here. You can see it from over there. From this vantage point, right, some of those little bushes in the back there are easier to see. If you're a little bit closer, you might notice that my poor little tree here has actually got some kind of disease, and I'm not really sure how to cure it. It happens every year. It doesn't seem to kill it, so I'm not too worried about it. But if you're not close enough, or you can't see that kind of detail right there. And then, of course, you have vantage point on a more extreme level. So here you have a totally different view. You can see a whole different part of my yard. And that kind of thing is certainly important for eyewitness testimony, right? So if two people have two different vantage points, they can see something pretty different. But it turns out, really, that the answer to that question, I think, goes even deeper than that. So the organization of cells in your eyeball is a little bit different than mine, probably. Different people have different distributions of different kinds of cones, and we'll talk about what cones are. And of course, the connections between the cells in your eye and the cells in your brain are unique. All right, you've got it's actually not over 100 billion. People used to like to pan that term around. It's a little bit less than 100 billion cells in your brain. But you got a whole lot. And to think that all the connections in your brain are the same as mine, I mean, we know that those change with learning. Right? Those are plastic in some ways. And the development of the brain is always a little bit different for every person. And so your visual system is wired a little bit differently than mine. So how much does that change what you see? Because I think as individuals, we have this overarching assumption that what I see is basically what everybody else sees. And on some level, that's not a useless assumption, so you probably would call that a fence. And you would call those trees behind it grass on the ground. And so there's a lot of commonality in how we see the world. But I would encourage you to hesitate to assume or to take that too far in your assumption. And that's a fascinating question to really ponder, and I want you to be thinking about in the context of this course. So what is it about what we'll talk about in terms of how your sensory systems work and how that influences your experience or your perception, and how that can differ for different people? Because if you really want to truly understand another person, you have to try to see the world as they do. And although you may not be capable of doing that, at least having a healthy sense of humility and understanding that you can't fully grasp exactly what they see, exactly what they hear. I think that's a good starting point for understanding somebody just a little bit deeper than you otherwise might if you kind of took that for granted a little too much. So I hope that you're mindful of that as we walk through the course together.